Most people don't regret what they did. They regret the life they never allowed themselves to feel. It doesn't show up as regret at first. That would be too obvious. Too easy to recognize. The kind of regret people talk about is clear. It has a shape. A story. A moment you can point to. Something that went wrong. Something that shouldn't have happened. Words that shouldn't have been said. Decisions that led somewhere they shouldn't have. That kind of regret is visible. You can name it. You can trace it. You can say, that's where it went wrong. But this is different. It doesn't come with a clear origin. It doesn't arrive attached to a mistake. It doesn't give you something to fix. It begins quietly. You're sitting alone. Not in distress. Not overwhelmed. Just still. The kind of stillness that happens when nothing is asking anything from you. The day has slowed. The room is quiet. Light settles softly across the walls. There is no urgency. No demand. No problem to solve. And in that absence, something else becomes noticeable. A feeling. Subtle at first. Almost indistinguishable. You don't name it immediately. You just notice it. A slight weight in your chest. Not heavy enough to concern you. But present enough to stay. You shift slightly in your chair. Adjust your posture. As if movement might dissolve it. It doesn't. It stays exactly where it is. Unchanged. Unresolved. You lean back slowly. Look around the room. Everything is in place. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is missing. And yet, something feels incomplete. That word doesn't arrive immediately. Incomplete. It forms slowly. Because nothing in your life suggests that anything is lacking. You've done what you were supposed to do. Made the right decisions. Avoided the obvious mistakes. Built something that holds together. From the outside, there is no reason to feel this. And yet, you do. You exhale slowly. And your mind begins to move. Not intentionally. Just, drifting. Small moments begin to surface. Not dramatic ones. Not defining events. Ordinary scenes. A conversation you had recently. Someone asked you something personal. Not intrusive. Just, open enough. You remember the exact moment. You felt something real rising. Something honest. Something that would have required you to slow down. To speak differently. To stay in it a little longer. But instead, you adjusted. You gave a clean answer. A reasonable one. One that made sense. One that didn't complicate anything. The conversation continued. It worked. Nothing was wrong. Nothing broke. Nothing needed to be repaired. And yet, that moment stayed. Not because of what happened. Because of what didn't. Another scene appears. You're standing somewhere familiar. A place you've been many times. Someone says something that lands deeper than expected. You feel it. Briefly. A reaction that wants to move through you. Not dramatic. Just, real. But you contain it. You stay composed. You nod. You respond appropriately. You keep things stable. The moment passes. Like all the others. Nothing is wrong. Nothing needs to be fixed. But now, sitting here, you can see it differently. You didn't choose wrong. You chose control. That sentence lands quietly. But it doesn't disappear. Because it connects to something deeper. You stand. Walk slowly into the kitchen. The floor feels the same. The light unchanged. You open the cabinet. Close it again. The movement is automatic. But your attention is not. It's on the pattern beginning to form. You didn't make mistakes in those moments. You managed them. You handled them well. You said the right things. You avoided unnecessary complication. You did what made sense. And that's what makes this difficult to name. Because there is nothing to regret in the way people usually define regret. There is no failure. No collapse. No visible error. And yet, something lingers. You pour a glass of water. Drink slowly. The sound of swallowing feels louder than usual. You set the glass down. And the realization sharpens. This isn't regret about action. It's regret about absence. That sentence doesn't hit all at once. It settles. Spreads. Expands quietly through everything you've just seen. You walk back slowly. Sit again. And now your mind begins to trace it more clearly. Not what you did. What you didn't allow. You think about how many times you felt something real, and reduced it. How many times you wanted to say something, and simplified it. How many times you sensed a deeper moment, and moved past it because it wasn't necessary. Not because it was wrong. Because it wasn't required. You lean forward slightly. Elbows resting on your knees. And the truth deepens. You didn't avoid mistakes. You avoided intensity. That lands heavier. Because now, it reframes everything. Your life is not defined by errors. It's defined by restraint. Not dramatic restraint. Not visible restraint. Subtle. Consistent. Automatic. You sit there longer. The room quiet. And more moments begin to surface. Times when you almost said something real, and didn't. Times when you almost reacted honestly, and adjusted instead. Times when you almost stepped into something deeper, and stayed where it was safe. You can see it now. Not as isolated moments. As a pattern. You built a life that works. That functions. That holds together. But inside that life, there are spaces where something could have happened, and didn't. You lean back slowly. And the most uncomfortable truth begins to form. Not all regret comes from doing the wrong thing. Some regret comes from never allowing the right thing to fully happen. Your jaw tightens slightly. Because that sentence feels accurate. You didn't take the wrong path. You just stayed within a very narrow one. One that prioritized stability. Predictability. Control. You removed the unnecessary. The messy. The uncertain. And in doing that, you also removed something else. Depth. You sit there longer. And the emotional layer begins to surface. Not loud. But present. A quiet kind of grief. Not for something lost suddenly. But for something that was never fully allowed to exist. You didn't lose moments. You reduced them. You didn't miss opportunities. You minimized them. You didn't fail to live. You lived carefully. And that is where the weight comes from. You exhale slowly. The room still. The light steady. And the final realization of this moment settles in. It's not what you did wrong. It's what you never let yourself fully feel while everything was happening. And once you see that clearly, it doesn't go away. By midday, the feeling has changed. It's no longer vague. It has structure now. Not something you can solve, but something you can observe clearly. You move through the house slowly. Not because you're tired. Because your attention has shifted inward. You rinse a glass. Dry your hands. Open a cabinet. Close it again. The movements continue as they always have. But your awareness is somewhere else. It's tracing something deeper. You didn't arrive here by accident. That becomes clear first. There is no randomness in this feeling. No sudden change. No unexpected break. You built this. That thought doesn't feel accusatory. It feels precise. You sit down. Lean forward slightly. Elbows resting on your knees. And now. Your mind begins to reconstruct the process. You didn't choose a life that feels incomplete. You chose a life that works. That's the difference. At every stage, you made decisions that made sense. That reduced risk. That avoided unnecessary complication. That kept things manageable. You chose what was stable. What was predictable. What could be controlled. And each time, the decision felt correct. Not just logically. Emotionally. Because it removed friction. It removed uncertainty. It made things easier to carry. You think back. Not in full scenes. In patterns. Times when something uncertain appeared, and you stepped around it. Times when something deeper was possible, but not required. Times when something real was present, but not practical. And each time, you chose the version that made sense. The version that kept things clean. That kept things stable. That kept things under control. You lean back slightly. And the realization sharpens. You didn't choose wrong. You chose safe. That sentence lands quietly. But it expands quickly. Because now you can see how consistent it was. Not once. Not occasionally. Repeatedly. You built a life out of decisions that minimized disruption. That avoided emotional risk. That prioritized function over experience. And it worked. That's the part that makes this difficult. Your life held together. Things made sense. You avoided chaos. You avoided unnecessary pain. You became someone reliable. Someone steady. Someone who doesn't complicate things. That identity didn't arrive all at once. It formed slowly. Naturally. Through reinforcement. Every time things went smoothly, it confirmed the pattern. Every time something difficult was avoided, it strengthened it. You stand. Walk slowly toward the window. Look outside. People moving. Life unfolding in ways you don't fully see. And suddenly, something becomes clearer. You weren't just making decisions. You were shaping your tolerance. You walk back slowly. Sit again. And the thought sharpens further. You lowered your tolerance for emotional intensity. That lands deeper. Because now it explains everything. You didn't avoid life. You avoided depth. Not consciously. Not dramatically. Just, consistently. You think about how many times you chose the easier conversation instead of the honest one. The smoother response instead of the real one. The stable path instead of the uncertain one. Not because you were afraid. Because it made sense. Because it worked. Because it kept things manageable. You lean forward again. Hands loosely clasped. And another layer appears. You didn't just choose stability. You became dependent on it. That changes everything. Because now stability is no longer a preference. It's a requirement. Anything outside of it feels unnecessary. Disruptive. Excessive. Not worth it. You stand. Walk into the kitchen. Pour water. Drink slowly. And as you do, another realization surfaces. You didn't just avoid intensity. You stopped recognizing it as necessary. That lands quietly. But it shifts the entire frame. Because now the absence of depth doesn't feel like something missing. It feels like something unnecessary. And that is how it stayed hidden. You walk back slowly. Sit again. And now the pattern becomes undeniable. You chose what worked, over what was real. Again and again. Not because you didn't value realness. Because you valued stability more. That trade-off didn't feel like a trade-off at the time. It felt like maturity. Responsibility. Control. You think about specific moments now. Times when something inside you wanted to say more, but you simplified it. Times when you felt something deeper, but you contained it. Times when you sensed something meaningful, but you moved past it because it wasn't required. You didn't ignore those moments. You minimized them. You reduced them to something manageable. You lean back slowly. And the truth deepens. You built a life that functions perfectly, without requiring you to fully feel it. That sentence lands heavy. Because now the structure is clear. You removed the need for emotional risk. You removed the need for uncertainty. You removed the need for depth. And in doing that, you also removed the possibility of something else. Something you didn't notice at the time. You sit there longer. The room quiet. And the emotional layer begins to rise. Not overwhelming. But present. A quiet recognition. You didn't lose depth. You designed around it. Your jaw tightens slightly. Because that sentence is precise. You didn't avoid life. You optimized it. And in that optimization, you filtered out everything that didn't serve stability. Including parts of yourself. You stand again. Walk into the hallway. The mirror catches your reflection. You pause briefly. Because now you recognize something clearly. This is the version of you that life rewarded. Controlled. Measured. Predictable. And that version works. But it doesn't fully live. You walk back slowly. Sit again. And the final realization of this moment settles in. You didn't just choose a life that works. You chose a life. That doesn't require you to feel too much. And now, you're starting to feel the cost of that. Evening is where it becomes unavoidable. The day gives you enough structure to keep things moving. Tasks. Conversations. Small responsibilities. Just enough momentum to stay slightly ahead of what you're feeling. But evening removes that. It slows everything down. The house quiets. The light softens. And suddenly, there is nothing left to buffer the space between you and what's underneath. You turn on a single lamp. The room contracts. Shadows settle into the corners. Everything feels contained. Still. You sit down. Hands resting loosely together. And for a moment, nothing happens. Then your attention shifts inward. And this time, the feeling doesn't stay subtle. It sharpens. A memory surfaces. Not dramatic. Just precise. You are sitting with someone. A conversation that should have mattered. They said something real. Not heavy. Not overwhelming. But honest enough to open something deeper. You remember the exact moment. You felt it. A response forming. Something more than what you usually say. Something that would have required you to stay there a little longer. To not move past it too quickly. But instead, you adjusted. You nodded. You responded in a way that made sense. A version that kept things smooth. Stable. Contained. The moment passed. Like it always does. Nothing went wrong. The conversation continued. Everything worked. And yet, that moment stayed. Not because of what happened. Because of what didn't. You shift slightly in the chair. And another memory surfaces. You're somewhere familiar. A place you've been many times. Someone says something that lands deeper than expected. You feel it again. That brief opening. A reaction that wants to move through you. Not dramatic. Just, real. But you contain it. You stay composed. You keep your voice even. Your expression neutral. You respond appropriately. You keep things manageable. The moment moves on. Like all the others. But now, sitting here, you can see it differently. You didn't miss that moment. You muted it. That sentence lands heavier. Because it's exact. You didn't fail to notice it. You felt it. You just didn't allow it to fully exist. You lean forward slightly. Elbows on your knees. And the pattern begins to reveal itself more clearly. Not one moment. Many. Across years. Small openings. Small opportunities for something deeper. And each time, you reduced them. Simplified them. Smoothed them out. You didn't avoid life. You moderated it. You sit back slowly. And the realization deepens. You didn't live incorrectly. You lived carefully. That lands with a different kind of weight. Because careful living doesn't look like a problem. It looks responsible. Mature. Controlled. And it is. But now you're seeing the other side of it. Careful living reduces impact. It reduces intensity. It reduces how deeply moments land while they're happening. You stand. Walk slowly into the kitchen. Open the fridge. Close it again. The movement is automatic. But your awareness is not. It's tracing something you can no longer ignore. You didn't just avoid pain. You avoided the parts of life that make it feel real. That sentence lands clean. Because now it explains everything. Why moments felt smaller than they should have. Why experiences didn't stay with you the way they could have. Why things that should have meant something felt muted. You walk back slowly. Sit again. And the emotional layer arrives. Not explosive. Not overwhelming. But deep. Steady. Difficult to escape. You feel it now. The accumulation. Not of mistakes. Of absences. Moments that could have held more. Conversations that could have gone deeper. Reactions that could have been more honest. You didn't choose wrong paths. You chose narrow ones. Paths that limited exposure. Limited uncertainty. Limited depth. You lean forward again. Hands clasped tighter now. And the sharpest truth surfaces. You lived correctly, but not fully. That sentence doesn't accuse. It clarifies. You did what made sense. You did what worked. You did what was expected. And in doing that, you removed what was unnecessary. What was unpredictable. What was harder to control. But those were also the things that made moments feel real. You sit there longer. The room quiet. The lamp steady. And the rupture completes itself. You didn't lose your life. You just never fully entered it. That lands deeper than anything before. Because now, there is nothing to argue with. You were there. In every moment. Physically present. Mentally aware. But not fully inside the experience. You managed it. You contained it. You moved through it efficiently. But you didn't allow it to fully move through you. You exhale slowly. And the final layer settles in. You didn't miss moments. You muted them. And now, sitting here, you can feel what they could have been. Not clearly. Not completely. But enough, to know the difference. The room is still. The light low. And now, the question isn't whether something feels off. You know exactly what it is. The question is harder. Can you keep living like this, now that you see it? Because once you recognize what has been missing, you can't go back to not noticing it. After the rupture, the instinct is immediate. Go back. Fix it. Find the moment where something was reduced, and change it. That's how most problems work. You locate the mistake. You correct it. You move forward. But this doesn't give you that option. You sit in the same chair. The lamp still casting that narrow circle of light. The room unchanged. But the question is different now. It's no longer, what did I do wrong? It's something more precise. What exactly am I regretting? You let the question sit. Not rushing to answer. Because the first instinct is misleading. It tries to point you toward decisions. Moments. Specific choices. Paths you took instead of others. But as you trace it carefully, something becomes clear. That's not where the weight is. You didn't take the wrong path. You didn't make the wrong decision. You didn't say the wrong thing. The regret doesn't attach itself to any of that. It attaches to something else. Something less visible. This isn't regret about action. It's regret about absence. The sentence lands again. Heavier now. Because you've seen the pattern. You stand. Walk slowly into the hallway. The mirror catches your reflection. You pause. Not to check anything. Just to look. Because now you understand something differently. You are not looking for a mistake. You are looking for something that was never fully allowed. You walk back slowly. Sit again. And your mind begins to reconstruct the deeper truth. Not all regret comes from doing the wrong thing. Some regret comes from never allowing the right thing to fully happen. That sentence settles into everything. Because now the structure is undeniable. You didn't block life. You limited how much of it you let in. You didn't collapse moments. You reduced their intensity. You didn't fail to experience life. You moderated it. You lean forward slightly. And another layer surfaces. You didn't avoid mistakes. You avoided intensity. That distinction matters more than anything else. Because mistakes can be corrected. Intensity cannot be retroactively lived. You can't go back and feel something fully that you chose to contain at the time. You can't re-enter a moment that you already passed through carefully. You can only see it now. From a distance. With clarity. And that is where the weight comes from. You sit there longer. The room quiet. And the emotional tone shifts. Not regret in the usual sense. Not guilt. Not shame. Something more precise. Recognition. You recognize what was possible. And what was reduced. And the gap between those two is what you're feeling. You lean back slowly. And the truth deepens further. You didn't just avoid pain. You avoided the parts of life that make it feel real. That sentence doesn't accuse. It explains. You wanted stability. You wanted clarity. You wanted things to make sense. So you removed the unpredictable. The uncertain. The intense. And in doing that, you also removed something else. Something you didn't notice at the time. The part of experience that makes it stay with you. You stand. Walk slowly toward the window. Look outside. Lights in the distance. People moving through their own lives. Moments happening everywhere. And suddenly, something becomes clearer. It's not that your life was empty. It's that it was contained. You return to the chair. Sit again. And the final realization of this moment settles in. You didn't regret your life because it was wrong. You regret it because you were not fully inside it. That lands with a different kind of weight. Because now there is no illusion left. There is nothing to fix. Nothing to undo. Nothing to correct. There is only something to understand. You sit there longer, letting that settle. Because this is where most people go wrong. They think regret means they need a different life. Different choices. Different paths. But that's not what this is. You don't need a different life. You need a different way of being inside the life you already have. That thought doesn't feel like a solution. It feels like a shift. Subtle. But fundamental. Because it changes the direction completely. You are not trying to rebuild your life. You are trying to enter it more fully. You lean forward slightly. And one final layer becomes clear. You don't need more time. You need more presence inside the time you already have. That sentence settles differently. Because now, it doesn't feel abstract. It feels immediate. You sit there in the quiet. The lamp steady. The room unchanged. And for the first time, this doesn't feel like regret. It feels like awareness. And awareness doesn't point backward. It points forward. Night has settled completely now. The house is quiet in a way that no longer feels accidental. Earlier, the silence carried tension. Something unresolved. Something sitting just beneath the surface waiting to be named. But now, it feels different. Not lighter. Not heavier. Just clear. You sit in the same chair. The same lamp casting that narrow circle of light. Nothing has changed around you. But something inside you has shifted direction. You are no longer trying to understand what went wrong. You understand what happened. And that changes what comes next. Because now, this is not about fixing the past. It's about interrupting a pattern that is still running. You lean back slowly. Let the idea settle. For years, your life has been organized around control. Stability. Predictability. Not in an obvious way. Not rigid. Not forced. Just consistent. You learned how to keep things smooth. How to reduce unnecessary friction. How to avoid emotional excess. How to move through moments without letting them expand too far. And it worked. That's why it stayed. But now you see the cost. Not in theory. In experience. And that's where the shift begins. Not with a big decision. Not with a dramatic change. With something much smaller. You stand. Walk slowly into the kitchen. Fill the kettle. Turn it on. The sound of heating water fills the room. You lean one hand against the counter. And for a moment, you don't move. You don't reach for your phone. You don't look for something to do. You don't move past the moment. You stay. That feels unfamiliar. Not uncomfortable. Just unused. Because for years, you've been moving through moments efficiently. Always slightly ahead of them. Always transitioning before they fully land. Now, you allow it to land. Even if it's small. Even if it feels unnecessary. You pour the water. Make the drink. Sit down again. The same chair. The same space. But your attention is different. You are not preparing the next action. You are inside the current one. That is the beginning. You pick up your phone. A message is there. Simple. Neutral. The kind of thing you would normally respond to immediately. Without thinking. Without pausing. But now, you don't answer right away. You look at it. And instead of reacting, you check something first. Yourself. What is actually happening in me right now? The question is simple. But unfamiliar. Because it hasn't been part of your process. Not consistently. Not intentionally. You sit with it. Not forcing an answer. Just, not bypassing it. And then something subtle happens. You feel something. Not strong. Not overwhelming. But present. A slight hesitation. A small resistance. A sense that your first response would have been automatic. Not wrong. Just, not fully yours. You type. Then stop. Delete it. Start again. Slower this time. More aligned. I'll come back to this later. You read it. Simple. Clear. But different. Because it reflects you. Not just the situation. You send it. And in that moment, something changes. Not outside. Inside. You didn't just respond. You stayed present while responding. That is the shift. Not dramatic. Not visible. But real. You lean back. Let the moment settle. Because this is where most people misunderstand change. They think it requires something big. A new life. A new path. A new version of themselves. It doesn't. It requires interruption. Small interruptions of the pattern that has been running automatically. The pattern of smoothing everything. The pattern of reducing intensity. The pattern of moving past moments before they fully form. You stand again. Walk toward the window. The glass reflects your image faintly against the darkness outside. You look at it. Not analyzing. Just noticing. And something is different. Not complete. Not resolved. But closer. Because now, you are not filtering the moment as quickly. You are allowing it to exist before you manage it. You didn't need a different life. You needed to stop minimizing the one you already have. That sentence lands quietly. But it holds. You walk back slowly. Sit again. And the final understanding becomes clear. Change doesn't begin when your life changes. It begins when you stop reducing your experience of the life you're already in. Even briefly. Even imperfectly. Because that's enough. That's where it starts. The next day doesn't arrive differently. There is no signal that something has changed. No shift in the world around you. The same light comes through the window. The same quiet fills the house. The same routines are waiting. And you move through them the way you always have. But not entirely the same. You wake up. Sit on the edge of the bed. For a moment, you don't move. Not because you're tired. Because you're aware. The instinct is still there. The part of you that prepares. That anticipates. That keeps things smooth. That keeps things under control. It hasn't disappeared. It doesn't need to. But this time, you don't follow it immediately. You notice it. You let it slow. You stand. Walk into the hallway. The mirror catches you again. And this time, you pause. Not to fix anything. Not to adjust anything. Just, to look. Not at how you appear. At how it feels to be there. It's subtle. But it's different. You move into the kitchen. Fill the kettle. Turn it on. The sound is familiar. But it no longer feels like something to move past. You stay with it. Just a little longer than usual. You pour the drink. Sit down. The same chair. The same space. Nothing has changed. And yet, something has. Because you are not moving through the moment the same way. You are not reducing it. You are not simplifying it. You are not moving past it before it fully lands. You are here. And that is new. Not because you were never physically present. Because now, you are not muting the experience while you're inside it. You take a sip. Set the cup down. And something becomes clear. You are still the same person. Still capable. Still controlled. Still able to make the right decisions. Still able to keep things stable. That hasn't changed. But something else has. You are no longer doing it at the cost of the moment itself. You move through the morning. Simple actions. Nothing significant. Nothing dramatic. But inside those moments, something holds. A presence that wasn't there before. You notice when your mind starts to move ahead. Planning. Organizing. Smoothing. Reducing. And this time, you don't follow it completely. You allow a gap. And inside that gap, you remain. A feeling. A reaction. Something small, that you would have reduced before. Now, it stays. Not long. Just long enough to exist. And nothing breaks. Nothing becomes chaotic. Nothing collapses. The world does not fall apart because you didn't smooth the moment immediately. Because you didn't reduce it to something manageable. Because you allowed it to be slightly more than necessary. That realization is quiet. But it changes something fundamental. You can still live carefully. Still stay stable. Still make things work. But you don't have to live that way inside every moment. You don't have to mute everything to keep things functioning. You sit again later that day. The room quiet. The light softer now. And there is no urgency to move past the moment. No pressure to optimize it. No need to reduce it to something easier to carry. Because now, you understand something you didn't before. You didn't lose your life. You just never fully entered it. That is the difference. That is what has been missing. And that is why this feels different. Because nothing is actually gone. It was just, never fully allowed. You lean back slightly. The day settling around you. Nothing dramatic. Nothing resolved. But something, grounded. Because now, you are not trying to live a different life. You are allowing yourself to feel the one you already have. Not all of it. Not perfectly. But more than before. And that is enough. You reach for the light. Pause for a second. Not because you're unsure. Because you're aware of the moment. And in that brief pause, everything becomes simple. You were there, in all those moments. You just weren't fully inside them. And now, you are beginning to be. You turn off the light. The room goes dark. But nothing feels hidden in the darkness. If anything, something feels closer there. Because for the first time, you are not just living your life. You are letting it reach you.